Hi, welcome to Studio on a Budget's Guide to Home Recording Volume 1. If you'd like to start recording your music at home, make a really hot demo tape, or even put together a studio on a budget, then this tape is for you. We'll be covering the basics of music recording, showing you how different types of equipment work, and giving you some good sound techniques to help get you started. We'll also talk about new technologies in recording and how to get the most out of some of the old technologies. And although we'll be covering mostly the basics since this is Volume 1, I'd like to encourage advanced home recording artists to watch as well. Hopefully you'll pick up some recording tips you can apply in your home studio. Okay, to begin, in order for you to get the most out of this video, we've divided it up into sections. Each section will cover a certain aspect of the recording process, and as you can see, a running index counter in the lower right-hand corner of the screen will help you find or review any specific part of the video. This way you can skip around to the parts you want specific information on quickly and easily. Well, the first place to begin any recording is with a song, and I've just finished writing a simple little tune. It has 4 parts: drums, bass, guitar, keyboards, and it goes something like this. Well, okay, I admit the song's probably not going to go platinum, possibly aluminum, but it will be a good illustration of basic multi-instrument recording. In the song we'll be recording, there are 4 instruments: piano, guitar, bass, which I played from a bass synthesizer, and drums from a digital drum machine. Throughout this video, we'll be assuming that you'll be recording 1 instrument at a time. This recording technique is called overdubbing. Okay, let's jump right in and discuss 3 ways to record the song I've just played. They are sound-on-sound recording, MIDI sequencing, and multi-track recording. Let's start with the least expensive, most bare-bones way of multi-instrument recording. It's called sound-on-sound recording. Now this is one of those techniques to use when you're flat broke, your 4-track recorder's broken, and need that demo tape done by tomorrow. Don't expect compact disc quality, but hey, in a pinch it works. The easiest way to explain a sound-on-sound recording is to do one, so here goes. You'll need 2 tape recorders and a mixer. 2 cassette decks will work fine if that's all you have. If you have a reel-to-reel recorder, definitely use it. In case you're just starting out, a mixer is a device that takes 2 or more audio signals and mixes them together so that you can adjust the volume of each individual instrument. The order in which you record your parts is up to you, but the rhythm track should almost always be the first ones recorded, since you'll probably need a beat to play along to. I've programmed the rhythm section to this song into a digital drum machine. Drum machines won't replace real drummers, but they have their advantages. They never lose the beat, they always show up to the session on time, and most importantly, you can turn them down. I can say that because I'm a drummer. Obviously, they have a lot of disadvantages compared to a good drummer, but I think in a small studio they're a great addition. Once the song is programmed into the digital drum machine, recording the drums onto tape is as simple as pressing start on the drums and then adjusting a good recording level on the deck you're recording on. To adjust your good recording level, though, we need to know how to read our level meters. Adjusting the recording level properly is really important for getting a good recording, so you should know how to read your meters. You'll find level meters on your tape recorder and your mixer, but they work the same on both devices. The most common type of meter is the VU meter. VU stands for volume units, and it gives you an average indication of how loud your music is. VU meters come in 2 flavors, standard and LED, but they both work the same. I want to record the signal as loud as possible without having the needle linger in the red zone. Try to keep the needle in the safe area, which is just to the left of the red zone. Don't worry if the needle jumps into the red occasionally, we just don't want it there all the time. Here the level is too loud, and here it's probably too soft. And remember, if your song has loud and soft parts, set the recording level for the loudest part of the song. Let's jump back to the beginning and I'll show you what I mean. This song starts with a quiet hi-hat, so I'll wait till the drums kick in to set the level. Some VU meters also have a peak LED indicator. Adjust these like a standard VU, but watch the LED for too many peaks, which the VU meter may not respond to, especially on percussion tracks. Most of all though, use your ears. They can tell you a lot more than the meters can. Obviously, you should set your recording levels before you actually record. Okay, our levels are set, we're ready to record. Simply press record on tape deck number 1, start the tape rolling, then start the drums. Now make sure and watch the levels as you record. If the levels get too hot or too low, you'll have to start over. Okay, now we have drums recorded on deck number 1. The second instrument I like to record is the bass guitar. Once you've got the drums and the bass down, you've got a good foundation for the other instruments and vocals to overdub to. Since I don't play the bass, however, I'll be cheating and playing the bass on the synthesizer. Now, since these are standard run-of-the-mill cassette decks, if I try to record the bass track on the same tape as the drum track's on, I'll erase the drums. So I'm getting around this by copying the drum track from deck number 1 to deck number 2 and simultaneously recording the bass part while I play it live. I'll use the mixer to mix the two together and to adjust the relative levels. Here's how the equipment needs to be hooked up. As you can see, deck number 1 is going into channels 1 and 2 on the mixer. Why 2 channels for one drum track? Because I'm recording in stereo. If you have pan knobs on the mixer, pan channel 1 hard left and channel 2 hard right. We'll use channel 3 for each new track we add, in this case a bass track. As always, we'll begin the recording process by setting our levels. Start deck number 1 playing and adjust a good level on channel 1 and 2 for the drum track. Now I'll stop the tape and adjust the level for the bass synthesizer. By now you're probably asking, how can I tell whether the bass will be too loud or too soft compared to the drums? Well, you can listen to the mix through a pair of headphones while you record, or better yet, through a pair of speakers. If you're recording a loud guitar or anything that would prevent you from getting a good headphone mix, you'll just have to do a trial recording and see how the mix turns out. If it doesn't turn out quite right, readjust the volumes on the mixer and try again. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's stop our decks and play back deck number 2 and listen to our mix. Not bad. Now I want to add the guitar, but first I have to do a little cable repatching. Since I'm now copying the drums and bass part on deck number 2 to deck number 1, I have to repatch the cable so that deck number 2 is feeding deck number 1. The setup will now look like this. If you don't want to repatch every time, you can simply swap the tapes between the two decks so that deck number 1 is always feeding deck number 2. But remember, tapes always sound the best when they're played back on the same deck they're recorded on, so you may have to experiment to see how it sounds. Okay, on to the guitar track. Again, the procedure is the same. First, set the levels for the source deck, then for your new instrument, in this case, the guitar. Make sure to fast forward past your original track on deck number 1 before you record your new part, and write down the number on the tape counter so you know where you're at. If you do this every time, you have the luxury of going back a few tracks and trying again if you later decide you don't like the mix. All right, we're ready to record the guitar part. First we start deck number 2 playing, then deck number 1 recording, and wail away. We repatch again to prepare to record the final piano track. So there you have it, sound-on-sound recording. A decent sounding recording with each instrument recorded one at a time.
Excuse me, Kurt?
Yeah?
Well, I think the bass drum could be a little louder, and why not put some gated reverb on the snare? You know, the drums could sound a lot better.
Yeah, well, that's true. But this, unfortunately, is where the sound-on-sound recording method falls to the ground. You see, since all of the instruments have been mixed while they were recorded, we can't change anything on any one instrument without having to re-record all the instruments we recorded after that instrument. In other words, if I decide when I'm through that the guitar should be a little louder, I have to go back to the drums and bass track, re-record the guitar at a louder level than I did before, and then re-record the piano part as well. Well, this gets to be a real drag when you have a song with 9 or 10 parts and you decide to change part number 4. While we're at it, let's sum up sound-on-sound recording by listing its advantages and disadvantages. First, the advantages. Number 1, cheap, cheap, cheap. This is probably the cheapest way to overdub and still get a decent sounding tape. Number 2, it's easy to master. You don't even have to swap cables between bounces if you don't want to. I know a guy who, for a long time, used a Sony Walkman cassette player as his source machine, and then just swapped tapes between the Walkman and the recorder every time he overdubbed. Of course, he couldn't lay down too many tracks before the tape hiss and noise built up to an unacceptable level, but hey, it worked. There are lots and lots of disadvantages to the old sound-on-sound method, but there are 2 big ones. Number 1, you can't change levels or process individual tracks. Once you've recorded the last track, you're stuck with all the previous tracks unless you're willing to record them all over again. This gets old real fast. Second, you'll find that you just can't copy tape tracks too many times before the tape hiss drowns out the music. You will probably only be able to go 6 or maybe 7 generations down at the most. What does this mean? Well, your original tape is called your first generation tape. Your first copy is called your second generation tape. The second copy, the third generation tape, and so on. Each time you go down a generation, in other words, make a copy, the audio quality goes down, tape hiss goes up. Well, so much for the bargain basement sound-on-sound recording method. If you can't afford a multi-track recorder, give it a try. With a little practice, you should be able to make some fairly decent sounding recordings. One of the newest ways of recording music is the high-tech world of computer sequencing. That's right, like everything else, the recording industry is getting computerized, and musicians are using computers instead of, and in addition to tape recorders, to record their music. Let's start by defining sequencing. Sequencing involves the use of a computer to record musical information. Since all sequencers are computers of some type, we'll refer to them as simply sequencers. Before I explain how it works, though, remember, computers can't record music, they can only record information or data. So, in order for us to use computers to record music, we must first change music into data. How do we do that? Well, one of the answers is MIDI. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. If you've bought a keyboard or drum machine in the last few years, look on the back and chances are you'll find a MIDI jack. It looks something like this, and there are usually 3 of them. An in jack for accepting information into that instrument, an out jack for outputting information to other devices, and a through jack which simply passes on any information that comes into the in jack. You're probably wondering what this has to do with recording. Well, MIDI translates music into information, and on a keyboard it works like this. When you hit a key on a digital keyboard, information is sent out to the MIDI out jack. Information like what key you hit, how hard you hit it, how long you held it down, whether the sustain pedal was pressed, you get the idea. If the keyboard's MIDI out jack is connected to a computer sequencer's MIDI in jack, that information can be recorded by the sequencer and sent back later to the keyboard to recreate exactly what you've played. Pretty impressive, huh? It's a lot like a very high-tech player piano. We've all seen player pianos, and the way they work is pretty simple. A player piano records information about what the performer played and stores it onto a paper scroll. This information can then be sent back to the piano to play it live. The sequencer does exactly the same thing, but uses memory chips instead of paper scrolls. It's called sequencing because the computer records the data you send it sequentially, one piece at a time. In this studio, we have 2 keyboards and a drum machine connected via MIDI to a home computer. Although you can buy dedicated sequencers, I'm using a home computer with the appropriate software and interfaces to turn it into a sequencer. This is an expensive way to get a sequencer, but you can always use the computer to do your taxes or to write letters when you're not recording music. Let's say I want to record a piano track. First, I tell the computer to receive information from the piano. Then I tell it to begin recording. Come over here, play my little ditty on the piano. Now I tell the computer to stop recording information. To play back what I've recorded, I simply reverse the procedure. I tell the computer to send the information back to the piano, like this. Voila! The really nice thing about sequencing is that since I'm not recording on tape, there is no tape hiss or any of the problems associated with tape. Also, since I've recorded only information on the sequencer, I can try out the piano track I've just recorded on any of the sounds that my keyboard is capable of generating. For example, this keyboard has 8 different sounds: 6 pianos, 2 harpsichords, vibes, and a clavichord. Let's tell the computer to send out the information again. Now let's page through this keyboard sounds until we find the one we want to use. You can't do that with a tape recorder. Another nice thing is that almost all sequencers allow you to edit what you've played. That's right, if you hit a wrong note, you can fix it. You can even move parts of your song around, copy certain sections, the list goes on and on. So the advantages to sequencing are: number 1, no tape hiss or other tape problems because we're not recording on tape. Number 2, you can send the recorded information to any MIDI-compatible device, so you don't have to play back your music on the same sound or even the same instrument that you played when you recorded it. Number 3, if you want your recording to be absolutely perfect, editing comes in real handy. Number 4, many musicians sync their sequencer to their multi-track recorders to increase the number of available tracks. And obviously there are many more advantages that I'll talk about in later volumes. So what are the disadvantages? Well, there are 2 big ones. As you've probably figured out, the biggest disadvantage to sequencing is that since the computer is playing the instruments live, you have to have a separate MIDI instrument for each track. In other words, if you wanted to record a synthesizer horn part, a synthesizer organ part, and a synthesizer piano part, you would have to have 3 synthesizers when you mix down the song. This can get real darn expensive, unless you have a lot of friends with keyboards. With a multi-track tape recorder, you can use one keyboard and record different sounds on different tracks. Keep this in mind when you're shopping for sequencers. Remember that a 16-track sequencer is a lot different from a 16-track tape recorder, unless you have 16 different MIDI instruments. Tracks on a sequencer are called virtual tracks, and it's nice to have a lot of them for experimenting and editing, but not necessary. To get around this limitation, a few synthesizers and synthesizers in a box are multi-timbral, which means that they are capable of playing more than one sound at the same time. This is a good investment for you potential sequencing types. Multi-timbral instruments are limited by how many notes they can play at the same time though, and this is indicated by how many voices the keyboard has. An 8-voice keyboard can play as many as 8 sounds at the same time. If it's multi-timbral and you play a chord with 6 notes, you have only 2 notes left for any other sounds on that instrument. Try to get as many voices as you can afford. The other major disadvantage to sequencing is that you can only record instruments that are MIDI compatible. You can't record vocals, your guitar, anything that doesn't have a MIDI jack on the back. But as I said a moment ago, sequencers can be used with multi-track tape recorders to greatly increase their flexibility and number of tracks. So on the downside of sequencing, we have the expense of having to purchase a lot of instruments for separate track recording. You can't record anything acoustic, only instruments that are MIDI compatible. If you sync the sequencer to tape, you have to devote one of your tape tracks as a sync track to sync the two devices together. So if you have only a 4-track recorder, you now have only 3 tape tracks for recording acoustic instruments and vocals. Everyone I know who uses sequencers has spent a lot of money on equipment, interfaces, and software. And finally, if you're at all intimidated by technical apparatus or computers in general, you should know that sequencing can be difficult to understand at first. But don't let these facts steer you away from sequencing if you're serious about recording. It's definitely the wave of the future and a great way to expand the capabilities of your home studio. My best advice is to get all the information you can about different kinds of sequencers before you commit to a specific model. Chances are you'll use it for years, so make sure you buy one with more features than you need, because believe me, you will use them. This is a multi-track recorder, a 4-track, one of the most important first purchases to any home studio. Although I'm sure you're probably familiar with the theory behind multi-tracking, let's define it anyway. A multi-track recorder is a tape recorder designed to record multiple independent adjacent tracks. What does that mean? Well, let me show you how a typical cassette is divided up on a 4-track. Okay, here we are inside of a typical cassette tape. Your home cassette deck divides the tape up into 4 tracks. Side 1 left and side 1 right, which run here and here going this way, and side 2 left and side 2 right, which run here and here going this way. A 4-track recorder also divides the tape up into 4 tracks, but all 4 tracks run the same direction. Easy, huh? Yeah, you're right, that didn't make any sense. Sorry, I couldn't resist the special effect. In a 4-track recorder, the recorder divides the tape into 4 independent tracks, but all 4 tracks go the same way, so we don't have sides 1 and 2 as we normally think of them. This allows the artist to record a separate part on each track. For example, in the song I recorded, I could put the drum part on track 1, the bass part on track 2, the guitar part on track 3, and the piano track on track 4. Let's record the same tune again, this time on the 4-track recorder. You'll see there's a whole new technique involved. First, let's put the drums on track 1. First, I patch the output of the drum machine into the input of track 1 on the 4-track recorder. This is called patching direct because we're not using a microphone. This will give us a very clean sound, and I recommend patching direct whenever possible. Now I'll set my levels. And I'm ready to go. I almost always record the drums first, as I said earlier, so I'll have something to play along to when I record the other instruments. The other alternative is to record the drums and another instrument, like the bass guitar, at the same time, but on different tracks. Okay, here we go. Next comes the bass track on track 2. Again, I'm patching direct, so the procedure stays pretty much the same. Okay, the 3rd track is a guitar track. Now it's time to break out the microphone. Since this is an electric guitar, I'm patching the guitar into an amp to get the sound I like, then putting a microphone right on top of the speaker. Although we'll be talking about miking techniques later on in the series, this technique is called close miking, and we use it to help minimize outside noise from leaking through the microphone and into the guitar track. Finally, the digital piano can also be patched direct, and it goes on track 4. We are now finished with the recording process and ready to begin what I think is the fun part, mixing down. Many 4-track recorders have primitive mixers built into them. These will work fine if all you want to do is control the relative levels of each track. If you want to process any of the tracks as well, for example, add some reverb to the drums, you'll need a mixer like the one we used earlier. If you can't afford a mixer, experiment with adding any effects you want while you record. But be careful, recording tracks with effects means you're stuck with that effect, so choose carefully and experiment. Mixing down involves adjusting the proper levels of each track while copying your original 4-track tape to a tape that is 2-track stereo, usually a reel-to-reel, or I like to use VHS Hi-Fi. On this 8-channel mixer, I've patched tracks 1 through 4 on the 4-track into tracks 1 through 4 on the mixer and labeled them accordingly. The left and right outputs of the mixer go to the machine I'm mixing to, in this case, a cassette recorder. When we've mixed the song, our master tape will be on cassette in this case, and we can make all the copies we need from that tape. To mix, we start our master recorder recording, our 4-track player playing, and then adjust the level of each individual track over here on the mixer. We can also adjust the EQ of each track and add special effects like reverb and delay if we have any. But rather than getting into mixing too far at this point, let's delve further into the world of multi-track recording. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve I'd like to show you. Get out of there. Murphy's Law of multi-track recording says no matter how many tape tracks you have, you'll always need 4 more. With this depressing thought in mind then, let's talk about some ways to get the most number of tracks out of your 4-track recorder, although the same tips can be applied to an 8 or even a 12-track machine. The first trick is a tried and true one. It's called ping-ponging because you're bouncing tracks around to create new empty tracks. Let's say I've decided to put a keyboard solo on my song. I now have 5 tracks to record: drums, bass, guitar, piano, and a keyboard solo. 5 tracks to record, 4 tracks available on my 4-track recorder. Well, it's time to play a little ping pong. Ping-ponging requires very careful planning. You must plan exactly how you're going to record before you start recording. Here's how we do it. Like before, we record the drums on track 1, the bass on track 2, and the guitar on track 3. But before we record the piano part, we're going to mix down tracks 1 through 3 and record them on track 4. If your 4-track is unable to route the signal internally, you can accomplish bouncing like this. First, turn the pan knobs on tracks 1 through 3 all the way left. This sends the mix of these tracks only to the left output of the 4-track. Now connect a patch cord from the left channel output of the 4-track to the input on track 4. Set it up to record on track 4. Set your playback levels on tracks 1 through 3 and your record level on track 4 and begin recording. When you're finished, listen to your mix on track 4. If it's not perfect, you can try again as many times as you like until it is perfect. You now have drums, bass, and guitar on track 4, and tracks 1 through 3 are now available to record new parts. If you have a mixer, the connection is like this. If you're like me, you'll want to make your recordings in stereo. But this is one of those things that sounds easy but requires very careful planning, especially when you're ping-ponging. So let's talk for a moment about stereo. On most multi-track recorders and all stereo mixers, there is a special knob called the pan control. This knob allows you to decide where you want a track to lie in the stereo field. Let's say, for example, you recorded a guitar part on track 2. By turning the pan knob, you can pan the guitar hard left, that is, it will only be heard from the left channel, hard right, it will only be heard from the right channel, center, it will be heard equally loud from both channels, or anywhere in between left and right. Watch the left and right levels on the master VU meters as I pan from left to right. In order to know where to pan each track, let's look at a band playing on stage. In this band, there's a guitarist on the left side of the stage, drums and bass in the middle, and a guitarist on the right. When panning, try to create a stereo field that suggests the band is playing on a stage in front of you. In this case, I would pan guitar left, the bass in the middle, the drums in various positions in the field, and the other guitarist on the right. Experiment with different panning positions too. Try expanding the pan of the drums to make the drum set seem huge. Also, when you're mixing, try panning an instrument while it's playing. But too much live panning can be a little too psychedelic, so don't overkill. If you'd like your finished song to be in stereo, you have to plan for this from the start, especially if you'll be doing a lot of ping-ponging. It's helpful to make a chart of all the parts you'll be recording and where you want them to be panned during the mixdown. This is an example of a recording preparation sheet. In fact, here's the preparation sheet for a 7-part song I'm about to record on a 4-track recorder. As you can see, I had several obstacles right from the start. First, I wanted the end result to be in stereo, so I couldn't mix tracks together that wouldn't ultimately share the same stereo image. You can see that I have some things center panned. In other words, the signal comes out equally loud from both right and left channels. This is also called mono, by the way. I wanted the piano and backup vocal to be panned left, and the electric guitar to be panned right. Now, since a track can only be panned one direction at a time, I knew that ultimately the piano and backup vocal would share a track, panned left, the electric guitar would have its own track, panned right, and everything else could be shared or divided among the remaining 2 tracks. Also, as I said earlier, I'm always concerned about how many times I transfer or bounce tape tracks. Remember, each time a tape track is bounced, it is said to have gone down 1 generation. And every time you go down a generation, the sound quality is a little bit worse. For this reason, I like to decide beforehand how many generations I'm willing to sacrifice for each track. This is how I figure out the best way to record the song. I like to keep percussive tracks and main vocal tracks down to an absolute minimum of generation losses, as these are usually the most important to the song and the first to sound bad when they start getting bounced around a lot. So with these 2 elements in mind, preserving stereo imaging and minimizing generation losses, let's look at 3 ways to record this 7-part song onto a 4-track recorder. The first thing to do is to write down your ultimate goals. In my case, it was 1, make a lot of money, 2, achieve national recognition, 3, establish world peace, and 4, transgress reality as I know it. I soon decided, however, a more realistic goal would be to write down my ultimate goals for each part in the song based on each part's pan position and the number of generations I would allow for each, and the number of tracks I had available, in this case 4. Here I've simply assigned the parts to individual tracks based on the recording procedure chart we've just looked at. Since I had 2 tracks available to divide the center pan parts among, I decided to separate the lead vocal track and record it alone on track 3. Why? Well, I find it especially important to have control over the level of the vocals when I'm mixing, so I try to make it a point of keeping the lead vocal on a separate track whenever possible. Once I've decided where I want to go, I have to decide how I'm going to get there. This is where a recording procedure chart comes in really handy. You can see before you begin recording the best ways to lay down your tracks. I played around with a number of variations and came up with this 10-part recording plan. Let's talk through it. Step number 1. The first thing I always record is the drums, if I'm using a drum machine. Here I put them on track 1. Many times if I'm recording a live drummer, I record the drums and bass at the same time, but on different tracks. Here I waited until step number 2 and recorded the bass next on track 2 while listening to the drums on track 1. I now have drums on track 1, bass on track 2. Since I decided earlier that I would eventually combine the drums, bass, and guitar solo parts onto one track, pan center, I now went to step number 3 and recorded the guitar solo on track 3. At this point, I'm almost out of tracks, so now it's time to free up some tracks and begin ping-ponging. Step number 4, I set up to bounce tracks 1, 2, and 3 to track 4. First, I do a dry run to set the proper recording levels. When I feel comfortable with my mixing ability, I start the machine recording on track 4, playing on tracks 1 through 3, and begin bouncing. When I'm done, I play track 4 and listen to my mix. If I didn't like it, I could simply try again, but it turned out pretty well. So it's on to step number 5. Since the drums, bass, and solo are on track 4 now, tracks 1 through 3 are free for recording new stuff. So the piano part is recorded on track 2. This leaves only tracks 1 and 3 empty. At this point, I might just record the backup vocal part on one of the empty tracks and then bounce the backup vocal and piano tracks onto the other empty track. But I've run into a problem. I don't know about you, but I can't sing a backup vocal track without hearing the lead vocal, and I wanted to wait until the end to record the lead vocal, since it won't be bounced around. Do we give up and scrap the song? No. It's time for an old studio trick. Step number 6, recording a scratch track. A scratch track is a reference track only. It won't be used in the final song, but it's only there to help you out if you need to hear a part to record another part. It's called a scratch track because you'll use it to listen to now and scratch it as soon as you're finished with it. Once the lead vocal scratch track is on track 1, we move to step number 7, recording the backup vocal. At this point, it's starting to sound like a real song. We can listen to the drums, bass, guitar solo on track 4 and scratch vocal on track 1 while we record the backup vocal on track 3. Step number 8, bounce time again. We no longer need the scratched vocal track on track 1, so we bounce tracks 2 and 3, backup vocal and piano, onto track 1. At this point, we've completed all the bouncing, and we now have 5 parts split up among 2 tracks. Not bad. We even have 2 tracks left to record our remaining 2 parts. So, obviously, step number 9, record the electric guitar on track 2. And step number 10, record the lead vocal on track 3.
This is a demo, this is a demo.
At this point, we're ready to mix. So like before, I'll patch tracks 1 through 4 on the 4-track into channels 1 through 4 on the mixer. Remember, since the piano and backup vocal are both on track 1, I can't adjust the volume on one without changing the volume on the other. This same thing goes for the drums, bass, guitar solo track on track 4. This is the big drawback of ping-ponging. Hopefully, though, we've got a good relative mix for these tracks earlier when we're bouncing. As previously decided, I panned the piano and backup vocal on track 1 hard left, the electric guitar on track 2 hard right, the vocal on track 3 center, and the drums, bass, and guitar solo on track 4 center. I've decided that the mix doesn't need any EQ or effects at this point, so all I do to begin mixing is to start my mastering recorder recording, start the 4-track playing, and have at it.
This is a demo, this is a demo.
Voila, a completed 7-part song in stereo. No one said it would be easy, but if you're after high quality, you have to pay the price. Assuming this is our goal, high quality that is, let's look at an even better way to record this song. This is method 2, ping-ponging plus live recording. With this method, we conserve generation losses by bouncing recorded tracks and recording new tracks at the same time. As you can see on our chart, we've cut the number of steps down from 10 to 8, which is pretty impressive. We've also cut the number of generation losses on 2 parts, the backup vocal and the guitar solo, which as you know means better fidelity and less noise. Steps 1 and 2 are just like last time, so let's look at step number 3. Instead of recording the guitar solo on track 3 and then bouncing 1, 2, and 3 to track 4, we're going to save the solo from the dreaded generation loss by recording it while at the same time mixing it with the other parts. We do this by first patching tracks 1 and 2 into the mixer and adjusting their levels. Now patch the guitar into another mixer channel and adjust its level. Finally, patch the output of the mixer into the input of track 4 like we did before. Start the 4-track recording and wail away on the guitar. As you might have guessed, it will probably take you a couple of tries to get a good mix, since you're just guessing. If we run the guitar direct into the mixer, as opposed to miking it, we'll be able to set our levels perfect the first time by monitoring the mix through our headphones or through a pair of speakers. Of course, we give up the control of having the tone of the amp on the guitar. We do the same thing with the piano backup vocal track in step 6, thus cutting another generation loss. If you make a mistake, however, you'll have to start at the beginning again, a disadvantage of this technique. Of course, you can always combine any and all of these techniques as you may need them. Give this one a try, though. The generation losses you save make it a real winner for recording with a limited number of tracks. Let's say you'd like to record this song with all 7 parts, but you don't want any of the parts to share the same stereo position. None of them will be panned hard left or hard right, and none of them can be bounced together since they won't be panned in exactly the same direction. There are 2 things you can do. First, record your first 4 parts on 4 different tracks. In this case, we would record the drums on track 1, the bass on track 2, the piano on track 3, and the electric guitar on track 4. Now we're going to mix down the song onto a 2-track recorder exactly as if we were mastering the finished song, even though we haven't added the vocals or solo yet. Remember, we patch each track into the mixer if we have one, and that goes into our mastering recorder. I now adjust the pan positions that I want for each track. I wanted the drums to be a little bit to the right of center, the bass to be center, the piano to be nearly hard right, and the electric guitar to be nearly hard left. I start the master recorder recording and begin mixing. When I'm finished, the first thing I do is listen to the mix and see if I'm happy with it. If not, I try again. Now what I'm going to do is bounce this stereo submix back to tracks 1 and 2 on the 4-track, leaving the other 2 tracks for our remaining parts. It's called a submix because it's just a partial mix, not the completed mix. I'll need to repatch, so the connection will look something like this. I now have the left and right channels of the song on tracks 1 and 2. I have tracks 3 and 4 left for the remaining parts, the guitar solo, the backup vocal, and the main vocal. Wait a minute, that's 3 parts, but only 2 tracks left. What do? No problem. We can go back to method 2, bouncing plus live recording. First, we record the main vocal on track 3. Then we run track 3 to the mixer and bounce it to track 4 while at the same time recording the backup vocal just like we did a few minutes ago. We then have both vocal tracks on track 4. This frees up track 3 to record the guitar solo. It's time to mix again, so we make our connections like before. Since we have our stereo submix on tracks 1 and 2, we pan track 1 hard left and track 2 hard right. We can then pan tracks 3 and 4 anywhere we'd like. I'll put the guitar solo on track 3 a little bit left and the vocals in the center. Then we mix as usual. I should also mention quickly that if you have a friend who also has a 4-track recorder, you can also mix your first 4 tracks down to tracks 1 and 2 on his machine, which will leave you tracks 3 and 4 for recording 2 more tracks. This may save you a generation loss, but you have to find an unselfish friend. Let's talk about a great little recording technique called punching in. Punching in involves going directly from the play mode to the record mode. Let's say I made a mistake on the piano part during the last song. I could start over, but I really like the way I played the beginning part, so there's no point in erasing that part. Here's what we do. We set the 4-track in the record standby mode for track 2, which is the piano track. Most multi-track recorders allow you to punch in via a foot pedal of some sort, which is great because it allows you to keep both of your hands free for playing. On this recorder, there is a button which puts the machine into the sync mode. This will allow us to play back the piano part on track 2 up until the very moment we want to punch in and begin recording. We can also listen to the other tracks while we record, since we'll only be punching in on track 2. As you can see, here is where I made the piano mistake on track 2. First, I'll go back 10 seconds or so and look for a good blank spot to punch in. I usually look for a rest or a pause of some sort in the piano track.
This is a demo, this is a demo.
Here are some tips for punching in. Number 1, try to punch in on the beat. Some cheaper recorders make an audible click when you punch in, and this can be masked by punching in on the beat, during a snare drum, for example. If you don't have a blank spot to punch in on, run the tape back a little further and play along with the tape exactly the same way you originally recorded the part. Then punch in anytime you want, and usually it will sound as if you never made an edit. First, I'll listen to the old track to refresh my memory. Then I'll begin playing along with it, and then punch in when there's a good spot.
This is a demo, this is a demo.
You can also punch out if you just want to correct a short segment on one track. Punching out can be less accurate than punching in though, so try to punch out as early as possible so you don't erase material after the punch out point. Punch out during long breaks, especially on noisy instruments like guitars. If you're not going to be playing for 2 minutes, punch out. There's no point in cluttering up the rest of the mix with your noisy guitar if you're not playing. Number 5, be careful. Remember, when you punch in, you're erasing whatever you had after the punch in point. So double check everything. Happy punching. While we're on the subject of tape recorders, it's worth taking a moment to talk about noise and noise reduction. The elimination of noise can mean the difference between a good sounding recording and a great one. We're all familiar with noise and no one I know likes it. Basically, noise is any unwanted sounds that enter your recording. Let's listen to some of my favorite types of noise. Each of these types of noise is completely different from the others, so let's tackle them individually. What causes tape hiss? Well, basically it's just a side effect of the way analog tape is recorded. And unless we go digital, we're always going to have some tape hiss. But don't get too discouraged, because there are all kinds of ways we can minimize it, and I recommend them all. First, record on the fastest tape speed possible. The faster the tape passes over the head, the better its signal-to-noise ratio. That is, the relative loudness of the main audio compared to the noise in the recording. The higher the signal-to-noise ratio, the less noise will be heard, and of course, the better the recording will sound. Most cassette recorders poke it along at a mere 1 7/8 inches per second. Friends, this ain't very fast. Some 4-track cassette recorders can go twice normal speed, or 3 3/4 inches per second. This is definitely the way to go if your budget allows only cassette recording. I've used this format for years and made some great sounding tapes. Moving on up to reel-to-reel tapes, the tape speed increases dramatically. The slowest speed used by professionals is 7.5 inches per second. Some reel-to-reels can go slower, but the slower speed should never be used for recording music. The next step up in speed and price is 15 inches per second, and professional reel-to-reel recorders travel at a whopping 30 inches per second. If you're mastering, consider VHS or Beta Hi-Fi recorders. The writing speed on these units can be as much as 18 feet per second. The next step up is to go digital, either with a VCR and a PCM digital encoder or a DAT recorder. Digital tapes are next to impossible to splice manually though, so keep that in mind. The second way to reduce tape hiss is with noise reduction circuitry, and this circuitry may be built in or used externally. The 3 most popular types of noise reduction are Dolby B, Dolby C, and DBX. Dolby B is the standard noise reduction you'll find on any home cassette deck, and it works fairly simply. When the audio signal is recorded, the Dolby B circuitry adds a certain amount of treble or highs to the signal. This is known as the encoding process. When you play back the signal, it cuts back these highs, taking any tape hiss that may have been added down with it. This is, of course, the decoding process. Dolby B is nice because if you don't decode the signal, it will just sound a little brighter or more trebly. Unfortunately, it only works so well, and for most pro needs, we need something more. So, they came out with Dolby C. Dolby C is a much improved version of Dolby B. It reduces substantially more tape hiss than Dolby B, but it must be decoded when played back, or your music can sound really weird. By all means, go for a deck with Dolby C if you can afford it. It works really well. The third major type of noise reduction is DBX. You either love DBX or you hate it. I love it, so I recommend it very highly. Here's how DBX works. Instead of boosting the highs, DBX works by compressing the entire audio signal down 1/2 during recording, then expanding the signal when it's played back. Of all these methods, DBX offers the most noise reduction. So why doesn't everyone use it? Well, on certain types of music, DBX occasionally has the tendency to breathe. The breathing is the DBX wiping out the noise. This bothers some people, but I've never had a problem with it. Try it out and see how it affects your music. Most noise reductions are built into the recorders, but some can be used externally, like this Dolby unit and this DBX unit. Try to get the built-in ones if you can. There are also single-ended noise reduction units that can remove some tape hiss on music you've already recorded. These work by reducing the highs relative to the volume of the music. These units can work in a pinch, but my advice is don't expect too much. The third way to reduce tape hiss is with a noise gate. A noise gate actually functions like a gate. When the audio level drops to a certain point, the gate closes and no more sound gets through. The trick is to set the gate to close just above the noise floor, that is, the quietest part of the tape, just above the tape hiss and other noise. This is called setting the threshold of the gate. You patch the recorder or mixer into the noise gate, and now the gate will stay closed whenever there is no music playing, thus eliminating the noise. As soon as the music kicks in, the gate will open, and the music will mask the tape hiss, hopefully. So to sum up tape hiss, I recommend using Dolby C or DBX noise reduction. If you still have problems, use a noise gate. So much for tape hiss. Let's move on to some other nasty types of noise. Hum can be caused by several things. The most common type of hum is called a 60 Hz hum, and it's caused by the electricity in your studio floating around and getting into your audio cables. Try to keep all AC cables away from audio cables. If they must cross, cross them at 90 degrees. Tying up your cables is a great idea. Also, check to make sure all your equipment is grounded properly. Use the third prong on the AC cords if you have it. If you still hear hum, it might be coming from your synthesizer or old piece of equipment. It may be time to upgrade or buy a noise gate. Also, try moving your mixer away from your power amps. If you can hear radio stations along with your music, it's RF interference. RF stands for radio frequency, and you hear it when your audio cables think they're antennas. This can be a real problem. It occurs in unbalanced cables as opposed to balanced cables. This is a balanced cable, this is an unbalanced one. A balanced cable will terminate in a 3-prong connector called an XLR plug. An unbalanced cable will end in anything else, usually a 1/4 inch or phono jack, or an RCA or phone jack. I also think it was dumb to name one phone and one phono. So what's the difference between balanced and unbalanced? I'm glad you asked. An unbalanced cable has 2 wires in it, one ground wire and one hot wire carrying the signal. This type of cable is very prone to pick up FM signals in the air, so keep these cables as short as you possibly can. This is a balanced cable used by most pros. It has 3 wires instead of 2. One is ground and the other 2 are hot but out of phase, which cancels out any noise the cable may have picked up. Definitely use balanced lines whenever possible. If your microphone uses balanced lines but your recorder has unbalanced jacks, pick up one of these matching transformers or one of these direct boxes. These match up your balanced and your unbalanced stuff and take care of all that impedance matching stuff you'd rather not worry about. If you still have problems, try using an AC power strip that filters out RF. Most computer stores sell them and it may cut out some hum too, so it's a good investment. Besides, most power strips like these are fused, which can protect all your expensive electronic stuff if there's a power hit. One more suggestion, avoid bunching your cables up. If you hear RF, try moving your cables around a little and see if it clears up. Thank you for watching. I hope you've picked up some useful tips for recording at home or in the studio. We've gone through a lot of the basics and hopefully given you some insight into the sometimes confusing world of multi-track recording. Just to whet your appetite though, here's a preview of what you can expect in future volumes. Good luck recording.